Edinburgh became flooded by heroin in the late 1970s, early 1980s, which in turn became linked to the rise of HIV infection in the city. A lot of us people maybe know the story through the book and the film Trainspotting, which kind of inspired that, which came out of that. What are your recollections of that period in Edinburgh, and what do you think maybe should have been done differently then, or did you tackle the situation as best as you could?
I think we were caught unawares by it. I mean, now we know that it was all to do with disruption in the Middle East and problems in Iran, and there was a flood of Afghan heroin made its way to Britain, and very quickly in the mid-70s got itself into the housing schemes. And I mean, I remember it very well. I was a beat cop in one of the busiest areas, and one of our local middle order criminals, a minor order criminal actually, turned up with a brand new red V12 E-Type Jaguar sports car. And we thought, I wonder where he got that. I wonder what he's been up to. Well, of course, what we didn't know was he was the first heroin dealer. And it went on from there, and it caused absolute mayhem through the 70s, and reached its first peak, because heroin has come and gone in waves, reached its first peak in the 80s, and took a terrible toll. I mean, when I was out of the CID for a short time in the 1980s, came back in 1986 as detective superintendent, one of the first things I asked the criminal intelligence to do was to say, where are all our major criminals who were active 2 or 3 years ago? Where are they? Have they dropped out of sight? Are they in prison? Have they moved on? Or are we missing something? And they came back to me and said, they're all dead. They're all dead. It took a huge toll on our young people, and of course continues to do so. And that's the disgrace of it, Norman. It continues to do so. We can't afford to lose the young people from Scotland that we are losing year in, year out to drugs.
One measure to combat the spread of HIV in Edinburgh was the licensing of the city's sauna and massage parlours. This is in the 1980s, with owners encouraged to hand out condoms and take other protective measures as a condition of their licence. It's been said that there was a kind of secret agreement involving the police and the Crown Office to kind of turn a bit of a blind eye to the activities, for the greater good, as it were. Was this true? Was there a bit of a kind of gentleman's agreement not to prosecute or raid the premises on standards?
Well, you can call it a gentleman's agreement if you like. I don't think there's many gentlemen involved. I was certainly involved in it. What actually happened? Initially, it was nothing to do with HIV and AIDS. What happened in 1983? We had the murder of a sex worker called Sheila Anderson, and while we were investigating that, we discovered that the whole of the street sex scene had changed under our noses, and we hadn't noticed it. In the space of 6 months, a lot of the older streetwise women had disappeared and had been replaced by very young, I'm talking very young, teenagers, heroin dependent, or supporting people who were heroin dependent, who were on the streets, chaotic and extremely vulnerable. We also discovered that we were being visited by violent criminals, serious heavyweight criminals from the West, from your part of the world, from the north of England, and from Aberdeen and Dundee, people coming to Edinburgh, to Leith, basically to predate on these young girls. And that cost us, I mean, we knew then that we faced a very, very serious issue, because if we did not do something pretty radical, we'd have more murders. Because the level of violence which we uncovered was unprecedented. And we were very lucky that actually Sheila Anderson was the only person that was murdered, because a lot of people had been violently attacked. So what we did was we decided to change completely and look at the sex workers not as nuisance criminals, which we traditionally had done, and which everybody traditionally had done, but look at them as on them as victims. And most of them were victims. Most of them were people who had been in the care of the local authority, had become in children's homes. Most of them had been in care and were out on the streets. Something like 95% of street prostitutes had been in care. It was a disgrace. And there they were, and they were like lambs to slaughter. So what we did was we formed a partnership with some sex workers help group, which actually initially was set up by the Church of Scotland, of all people, and they were absolutely first class, a group called Shiva, a group called Scots Pep. And we appointed a very, very good, this was the key to it, we had a very, very good street cop called Pat Ellis. She was a highly experienced and no nonsense, can I tell you, policewoman, with a lot of experience. And we appointed her as a prostitute liaison officer. And she was the bridge. Because the other thing that had happened was we had lost all intelligence and information from the sex workers. Because coming from the backgrounds they did, Norman, coming from care homes, they didn't trust authority. And the last people they would go and speak to was the police. So we had to break down these barriers. And so what we did in association with the Procurator Fiscal was that we formed what they called a zone of discretionary prosecution. It wasn't a tolerance zone, as has often been titled, but the deal was simply this. If you, meaning the sex workers, restrict yourself to a dozen girls on the street in this geographical area, and there is no pimping, there is no drugs, there is no assaults and robberies, and there's no complaints from the public, then we, the police, will find other things to do. Okay? But if you breach any of these conditions, we'll come back and enforce the law. It was as simple as that. That was the deal. And that held good and I think saved many lives. Now, you talked about HIV and AIDS. We started this project as a public safety exercise to protect these girls. It transformed into a public health exercise when HIV and AIDS came on board. And Norman, it worked. It worked. It was informal. It was messy at times, but thanks to people like Pat Ellis, who could smooth over problems and get the job done, we had no more murders or serious assaults. Anything we did have was solved within hours because we had good relationships with the girls. And there was not the spread of HIV, the heterosexual spread of HIV and AIDS that we feared and suspected. The same could not be said of our rent boys. Unfortunately, they were one of the areas that we just never managed to get a grip of, unfortunately, although we tried very hard.